The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished floors of Richardson Global's corporate headquarters as a silver wheelchair glided smoothly through the lobby. Its occupant, a distinguished man in his early 40s wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, navigated with practiced ease toward the elevator banks. Though the workplace accident 5 years ago had changed his life forever, it had only strengthened his resolve to succeed in the business world. As the CEO of a thriving tech startup that had revolutionized accessibility software, he had arranged this meeting to discuss a potential partnership with Richardson Global. However, he had decided to arrive an hour early, unannounced, to observe how the company truly operated, especially regarding their treatment of people with disabilities. The security guard at the front desk barely glanced up as he approached, merely waving him toward the HR department on the 3rd floor. This was exactly the kind of real-world experience he wanted to witness. Making his way up, he could hear voices carrying from the open office area, including one particularly loud and dismissive tone that made him pause. "Can you believe what HR sent up for the partnership meeting today?" a woman's voice rang out with barely contained disdain. "Some guy in a wheelchair. Like we need that kind of liability around here. I don't care what kind of company he runs." The CEO remained still, listening as laughter rippled through the office. The voice continued, growing more animated. "I mean, seriously, how's he even going to make it through the building tour? We'll have to walk at a snail's pace. And those special accommodations they're always demanding? No thank you." He could have revealed himself right then, could have called out the discriminatory behavior on the spot. But years of business experience had taught him the value of timing. Sometimes, the most powerful message came not from immediate confrontation, but from allowing people to fully reveal their true colors. Taking out his phone, he quietly activated the voice recorder app, a habit he'd developed after years of encountering similar situations. Not for legal action, but as a tool for education and change. He'd found that people were more willing to acknowledge and learn from their mistakes when faced with their own words. The HR manager's voice grew louder as she approached his location. "Just watch, he'll probably expect us to completely redesign our whole office just to accommodate him. These people always want special treatment." The CEO took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and prepared himself for what would become a defining moment not just for him, but for corporate culture at Richardson Global. He had faced discrimination before, had overcome countless obstacles, but this particular situation offered a unique opportunity to create lasting change. As he rounded the corner into the HR department, the chatter immediately ceased. The HR manager's face, previously animated with mockery, froze in a mask of professional courtesy. She had no idea that the man she'd just been ridiculing was not only the CEO of the company they desperately wanted to partner with but also held enough influence in the industry to significantly impact their reputation. But instead of anger, he felt a familiar sense of purpose. This wasn't just about one insensitive HR manager or a single company's discriminatory culture. This was an opportunity to transform perspectives, to show that ability comes in many forms, and that true leadership isn't about physical capabilities but about vision, determination, and human dignity. The next few hours would prove to be transformative for everyone involved, though not in the way anyone in that office currently expected. As he positioned his wheelchair before the HR manager's desk, he caught the slight tremor in her hand as she reached for her business cards, the first sign that this day would be anything but ordinary. The HR manager's office felt smaller than its actual size, perhaps due to the thick tension that had settled in the air. The CEO watched with measured patience as she shuffled through papers on her desk, her previous confidence notably diminished. Her nameplate gleamed under the fluorescent lights, her position of Senior HR Director etched in bold letters, a title that should have come with greater sensitivity and awareness. "So, we'll just need to go through some preliminary paperwork before the executive team arrives," she said, her voice carrying none of the mockery it had held minutes earlier. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged documents, avoiding direct eye contact. The CEO maintained his professional demeanor, though the recording in his phone felt like a weight in his jacket pocket. "Of course," he replied smoothly. "Though I believe the partnership agreement was meant to be discussed directly with your executive team?" A flash of confusion crossed her face. "Oh, I thought you were here about." She trailed off, realizing she wasn't sure exactly what she had assumed. The prejudices that had led to her earlier comments were becoming increasingly apparent, even to herself. Just then, a knock on the door interrupted them. The company's chief operations officer entered, his face lighting up with recognition. "Oh! I didn't expect you to arrive so early," he exclaimed, extending his hand to the CEO. "We've been looking forward to this partnership discussion for weeks." The HR manager's face drained of color as realization began to dawn. The CEO could practically see the replay of her earlier words running through her mind. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The COO continued enthusiastically, "Your accessibility software has revolutionized workplace inclusion. When we heard you were interested in a potential partnership, our entire board was thrilled. We've been implementing new inclusion initiatives, though," he paused, glancing at the HR manager, "we clearly still have some work to do." The CEO nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed. I actually arrived early today to observe your company's natural dynamics, particularly regarding accessibility and inclusion. It's been illuminating." The HR manager's hands clasped tightly together on her desk. The gravity of her earlier behavior was crushing down on her with each passing second. What had seemed like casual office banter now stood revealed as the discrimination it truly was. More executives began filing into the office, each greeting the CEO with genuine respect and enthusiasm. The contrast between their behavior and what he'd witnessed earlier couldn't have been starker. The HR manager seemed to shrink further into her chair with each introduction. "Before we proceed with our partnership discussion," the CEO said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority, "I think we need to address something important." He reached for his phone, but paused, studying the HR manager's face. In her expression, he saw something beyond mere embarrassment or fear. There was a dawning recognition of her own biases. "I arrived early today and overheard some concerning comments about people with disabilities," he continued, watching as understanding rippled through the room. "Comments that reflect deeply problematic attitudes that can poison an entire corporate culture." The executives turned toward their HR manager, whose professional facade had completely crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear of punishment, but from genuine shame at having her prejudices so starkly exposed. "I could play the recording I made," the CEO said, touching his phone. "But I don't believe public humiliation is the path to genuine change. Instead, I want to discuss how we can transform this moment into an opportunity for real growth and learning." The room fell silent. The HR manager finally looked directly at him, her voice barely above a whisper, "I am so deeply sorry. My behavior was inexcusable. I've become exactly what I'm supposed to prevent in the workplace." The CEO nodded, recognizing the sincerity in her words. Acknowledgement is the first step. But real change requires action. "I have a proposal, not just for our business partnership, but for a complete overhaul of your company's approach to diversity and inclusion." The COO leaned forward, "We're all ears. Clearly, we need this more than we realized." What happened next would reshape not just Richardson Global's corporate culture, but set a new standard for workplace inclusion across the industry. The meeting that had begun with discrimination was about to transform into something far more powerful, a catalyst for genuine change. The conference room that had moments ago been thick with tension now hummed with a different kind of energy. The CEO wheeled his chair to the head of the table, pulled out a sleek laptop, and began sharing statistics that left the entire executive team silent. 77% of disabilities are invisible, he explained, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. And nearly 1 in 4 employees is afraid to disclose their disability at work. Ask yourselves why. His eyes swept across the room, lingering momentarily on the HR manager who sat with her notepad untouched, completely absorbed in his words. The presentation screen flickered to life, displaying a comprehensive analysis of Richardson Global's current accessibility standards, or rather, the lack thereof. The COO's face reddened as he realized how many simple accommodations their company had overlooked. But here's the interesting part, the CEO continued, switching to a new slide. Companies that embrace inclusive practices see an average of 28% higher revenue. Disability inclusion isn't just the right thing to do, it's smart business. The HR manager raised her hand tentatively, her voice steadier than before. I've clearly been part of the problem, she admitted. But I want to be part of the solution. What concrete steps can we take, starting today? The CEO's expression softened slightly. This was the kind of transformation he hoped to inspire. First, he replied, we need to acknowledge that changing physical infrastructure is the easy part. The real challenge is transforming mindsets. He wheeled back from the table and gestured to the space around him. See how this conference room is technically accessible? I can enter it, yes. But notice how I had to position myself awkwardly at the table? How the presentation screen is partially blocked from my angle. These are the details that show whether a company truly thinks about inclusion or just checks boxes. The executive team began looking around the room with new eyes, noticing dozens of small obstacles they'd never considered before. The chief technology officer was already sketching notes, his face animated with ideas for improvements. But let's address the elephant in the room, the CEO continued, turning to face the HR manager directly. Your comments this morning? They're not unique. They're symptoms of deeper biases that exist in many workplaces. The difference is, you've been given an opportunity to confront these biases head-on. She straightened in her chair, wiping away a tear that had escaped despite her professional composure. I want to take full responsibility, she said, her voice growing stronger. I'd like to propose a complete overhaul of our hiring practices, training programs, and workplace culture initiatives. The CEO nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of proactive response I was hoping for. But remember, this isn't just about disabilities. It's about creating an environment where everyone can bring their whole selves to work. He pulled up another document on the screen, a comprehensive proposal for a partnership that went far beyond their original plans. It outlined a revolutionary approach to workplace inclusion, with Richardson Global serving as a pilot program for new accessibility technologies and training methods. Your company has 2 paths forward, he explained, his voice carrying both challenge and opportunity. You can make surface-level changes and hope to avoid discrimination lawsuits, or you can become industry leaders in workplace inclusion. The choice is yours, but I know which option makes better business sense. The COO leaned forward, his expression serious. What's the first step? Transparency, the CEO replied without hesitation. Share what happened here today with your employees. Not to shame anyone, but to demonstrate real leadership in acknowledging and correcting mistakes. The HR manager spoke up again, her voice now carrying conviction rather than shame. I volunteer to lead that initiative. My team should hear this directly from me, including my own failings and what I've learned. The CEO smiled for the first time that day. That's exactly the kind of courage we need. But remember, this isn't about a single day of training or a one-time announcement. Real change happens in small moments, daily choices, and consistent effort. He pulled out his phone, where the recording of the morning's discriminatory comments still waited, unused. With a few taps, he deleted it. The HR manager's eyes widened in surprise. But that was evidence, she protested. Don't you want to keep it as proof? The CEO shook his head. I'd rather have proof of what you do next. Actions speak louder than words, and I'm more interested in the changes you'll make going forward than the mistakes you made in the past. The meeting continued for hours, but it felt like minutes. Ideas flowed freely, barriers broke down, and real solutions began to take shape. By the end of the day, Richardson Global had not just secured a business partnership, they had embarked on a journey that would reshape their entire corporate culture. As the CEO prepared to leave, the HR manager approached him one last time. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not for sparing me embarrassment, but for showing me a better way forward." He smiled again, more warmly this time. "The real test starts tomorrow," he reminded her. "Are you ready?" Her response would set the tone for everything that followed: "More than ready. We have work to do." The next morning at Richardson Global dawned with an unusual buzz in the air. The HR manager had arrived an hour early, her hands steady now as she prepared for the all-hands meeting she'd called. The large conference room filled quickly with curious employees who had received an urgent meeting invitation the previous evening. She stood at the podium, facing her colleagues with new determination. The CEO of the tech company had agreed to attend, his presence lending weight to the importance of what was about to unfold. As she began speaking, the room fell into a hushed silence. "Yesterday, I failed not just as your HR director, but as a human being," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "I made discriminatory comments about a person with disabilities, comments that revealed deep-seated prejudices I didn't even realize I harbored. That person turned out to be the CEO of our potential partner company, but that's not why my behavior was wrong." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Some employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats, perhaps recognizing similar biases within themselves. The CEO watched from his position near the stage, noting every reaction. "But this meeting isn't about my mistake," she continued. "It's about what we're going to do next. Starting today, Richardson Global isn't just changing its policies, we're transforming our entire culture." The presentation screen behind her came to life, displaying a comprehensive 3-month action plan. The first slide showed immediate changes: redesigned office spaces, new accessibility software installations, and mandatory sensitivity training, but with a twist. "Our traditional sensitivity training clearly wasn't enough," she acknowledged. "Instead, we're implementing an innovative program developed by our new partners. It includes real-world simulations, personal storytelling sessions, and practical exercises that go beyond mere compliance." A young software developer raised his hand. "What about those of us with invisible disabilities who've been afraid to speak up?" His voice trembled slightly, but he held his ground. The HR manager's face softened. "That's exactly why we're here. We're establishing a confidential disclosure program with guaranteed accommodations and protection. No one should ever feel afraid to be themselves at work." The CEO wheeled forward then, addressing the crowd directly. "Your HR director could have lost her job yesterday," he said, causing another ripple of murmurs. "Instead, she chose to turn this into an opportunity for genuine change. That's the kind of leadership we need more of in the corporate world." As the meeting progressed, more employees began sharing their stories. A senior accountant revealed her struggle with chronic pain. A marketing manager discussed his anxiety disorder. Each disclosure was met with support and understanding, creating a snowball effect of openness and acceptance. The practical changes were equally impressive. The maintenance team immediately began adjusting desk heights and doorway widths. IT staff started installing the new accessibility software on every computer. But more importantly, people's behavior began to shift. In the break room, an employee automatically moved a chair to make space for a wheelchair user. In the parking lot, someone noticed a faded accessibility marking and immediately reported it for repainting. Small actions, but significant in their spontaneity. The HR manager spent the afternoon in one-on-one meetings with employees who had requested them. Each conversation revealed new insights, new challenges to address, and new opportunities for improvement. By evening, she had filled 3 notebooks with action items and suggestions. "I never realized how many barriers we had created," she confided to the CEO as they reviewed the day's progress. "Not just physical ones, but psychological ones too." He nodded, understanding. "The hardest barriers to break are the ones we don't see. But once we see them, we can't unsee them. That's where real change begins." The company's social media channels came alive with posts about their new initiative. The PR team, rather than trying to hide the incident that sparked the change, crafted a transparent message about learning from mistakes and committing to genuine transformation. By the end of that first day, Richardson Global had already begun to feel different. The atmosphere had shifted from one of careful professional distance to one of authentic connection and understanding. Employees who had worked together for years were finally seeing each other as complete human beings, not just colleagues. The HR manager's final task of the day was updating the company's mission statement. As she crafted the new language, she realized how hollow the old diversity and inclusion paragraph had been, all buzzwords and no substance. The new version spoke to real commitments, specific actions, and measurable outcomes. As she packed up her things that evening, she noticed something surprising: employees weren't rushing to leave as they usually did. Small groups lingered, engaged in genuine conversations. Someone had organized an impromptu accessibility audit of the building. Others were brainstorming ideas for making their client presentations more inclusive. The CEO watched this organic transformation with satisfaction before heading out. "Remember," he said to her as he left, "culture change isn't a destination, it's a journey. You've made a strong start, but the real test will be maintaining this momentum." She nodded, understanding the challenge ahead. But for the first time in her career, she felt truly aligned with her role as a human resources leader. This wasn't just about managing people, it was about creating an environment where everyone could thrive. As the office lights dimmed that evening, the weight of yesterday's shame had been replaced by something more powerful: purpose. Richardson Global wasn't just changing its policies, it was pioneering a new way of thinking about workplace inclusion. And this was only the beginning. 1 month after the transformative day at Richardson Global, the changes had begun to ripple outward in unexpected ways. The story of the HR manager's confrontation with her own biases and the company's subsequent transformation had spread through industry circles, catching the attention of business leaders across the country. The company's lobby, once a standard corporate entrance, had been reimagined with universal design principles. Gone were the high reception desks and narrow passages. In their place stood an open, welcoming space that accommodated everyone naturally, without making accessibility features look like afterthoughts. The HR manager stood in this transformed lobby, preparing to welcome a group of executives from competing companies who had requested to learn about Richardson Global's new inclusion initiatives. She smiled, remembering how just weeks ago, she had been the one perpetuating harmful stereotypes. Now, she was leading workshops on unconscious bias and workplace inclusion. "The most powerful teaching tool we have," she explained to the visiting executives, "is our own story of failure and growth. We don't pretend to be perfect, we demonstrate how to learn and improve." The CEO's technology company had become more than just a partner. Together, they had developed innovative solutions that were transforming both workplaces. The accessibility software, originally designed for people with physical disabilities, had evolved to address a broader range of needs, from visual impairments to neurodivergent conditions. In the employee break room, a small but significant scene played out. A new hire, a brilliant programmer who used a wheelchair, was sharing lunch with colleagues. There was nothing forced about the interaction, no awkward attempts at inclusion, just natural camaraderie. The HR manager paused in the doorway, remembering her own previous discomfort around people with disabilities. The contrast between then and now was stark. The company's quarterly meeting brought more surprising developments. Employee satisfaction scores had jumped by 45%. Productivity had increased across all departments. The HR manager presented these figures with pride, but it was the personal stories that truly captured the transformation. One employee stood up to share how the new policies had given her the courage to disclose her chronic illness. "Before, I was spending so much energy hiding my condition," she explained. "Now, I can use that energy for actual work. And my team's support has made me more committed to the company than ever." The CEO wheeled onto the stage to share his own update. Their partnership had exceeded all financial projections, but more importantly, it had sparked a movement. Other companies were reaching out, eager to learn from their example. Richardson Global had become known not as the company that had discriminated, but as the company that had shown how to change. Real change, the CEO reminded everyone, happens in the small moments. It's in how we react when someone needs an accommodation. It's in the questions we ask before planning events. It's in the way we design our products and services from the start, thinking about all users. The HR manager's own transformation had perhaps been the most profound. She had taken on a new role as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, but her approach was uniquely humble. "I start every training session by sharing my own story of bias," she explained to a journalist who was covering their transformation. "It shows that anyone can change if they're willing to confront their prejudices honestly." The company's hiring practices had evolved dramatically. Job descriptions were rewritten to be truly inclusive. Interview processes were redesigned to accommodate different communication styles and needs. But most importantly, the culture had shifted to one where differences were not just tolerated but valued. One afternoon, the HR manager found herself in a meeting with the facilities team, reviewing plans for their new satellite office. She watched with pride as they debated the merits of different universal design features, not because they had to, but because they wanted to create the best possible workspace for everyone. "Remember when we thought installing a few ramps and wider doorways was enough?" the facilities manager chuckled. "Now we understand that true accessibility is about creating spaces where everyone can thrive naturally." The partnership with the CEO's tech company had blossomed in unexpected ways. They had created a joint innovation lab, where employees from both companies collaborated on new accessibility solutions. The lab had become a hub of creativity, where diverse perspectives led to breakthrough innovations. During a leadership meeting, the COO presented an interesting observation. "Our customer service ratings have improved significantly," he noted. "When we became more inclusive internally, it naturally affected how we treat our customers too." The HR manager's phone buzzed with a message from the CEO. He was sending her a draft of a joint keynote they would be delivering at an upcoming industry conference. The title read, "From Bias to Bridge Building: How One Mistake Transformed Corporate Culture." As she reviewed the speech, she reflected on how far they'd come. The company had moved beyond mere compliance or image management. They had created something authentic and sustainable, a culture where inclusion wasn't a program or initiative, but simply the way things were done. That evening, as she walked through the office, she overheard a team planning an upcoming client presentation. They were automatically considering accessibility needs, not as an afterthought, but as a fundamental part of their planning process. It was these small moments that showed how deeply the changes had taken root. The CEO's words from that first day still rang in her ears: "The real test starts tomorrow." They had passed that test, day after day, not perfectly, but with genuine commitment and continuous learning. Richardson Global had become more than a case study in corporate transformation, it had become a blueprint for how companies could turn their mistakes into opportunities for meaningful change. 6 months after the watershed moment at Richardson Global, the company's transformation had caught the attention of the business world. A major business magazine had requested to feature their story in their annual Companies Changing the World issue. As the journalist toured the office, the changes were evident not just in the physical space, but in the very fabric of workplace interactions. The HR manager, now Chief Diversity Officer, sat in what used to be her old office, though it looked very different now. The space had been redesigned to be welcoming to everyone, with adjustable furniture, clear pathways, and technology that could adapt to various needs. But the most striking change was the wall of photographs showing employees engaged in various company initiatives. "These aren't staged photos," she explained to the journalist. "They're real moments captured during our journey." She pointed to one showing an employee using sign language to present at a board meeting, while real-time captioning displayed on screens around the room. "This was the first time we had a deaf employee lead a major project presentation. Now it's just business as usual." The CEO had arrived for his monthly visit, but this time he brought news that would take their initiative to another level. Major tech companies had taken notice of their accessibility software innovations, and a consortium was forming to establish new industry standards for workplace inclusion. "What started as a confrontation of bias has evolved into something much bigger," he explained during the executive meeting. "We're not just changing one company, we're helping reshape how the corporate world thinks about disability and inclusion." The company's quarterly town hall that afternoon was being broadcast to offices worldwide, with live captioning in multiple languages and sign language interpreters visible on screen. The HR manager noticed how natural these accommodations felt now, no longer additions, but integral parts of their communication. A junior employee raised her hand during the Q&A session. "I've been diagnosed with ADHD," she shared. "At my previous job, I was afraid to disclose this. Here, my team helped me redesign my workspace and adjust my schedule to match my peak focus hours. My productivity has doubled." The story resonated across the virtual audience. Similar testimonials began pouring in from global offices, employees sharing how the company's transformation had impacted their lives. The HR manager felt tears welling up, remembering how different things had been just months ago. The partnership with the CEO's tech company had evolved into an innovation hub. They had launched a mentorship program pairing employees with disabilities with emerging leaders. The goal wasn't just to promote inclusion, but to actively develop diverse leadership talent. "The most powerful change," the HR manager shared with the journalist, "has been in how we think about ability. We've stopped focusing on limitations and started recognizing unique perspectives and strengths." This shift was evident in their hiring practices. Job interviews now included practical work simulations that could be completed in multiple ways, allowing candidates to showcase their abilities rather than being limited by traditional interview formats. The result was a more diverse talent pool and better hiring decisions. The CEO rolled into the main conference room for the afternoon's big announcement. Representatives from a dozen major corporations had gathered to launch the Inclusive Workplace Alliance, a commitment to sharing best practices and establishing new standards for workplace accessibility. "What happened at Richardson Global could have been just another corporate scandal," he began. "Instead, it became a catalyst for industry-wide change. Today, we're taking the next step. The Alliance would provide resources, mentorship, and support to companies wanting to follow Richardson Global's example." The HR manager watched from the side of the room, remembering her own biased comments from that fateful day. "Sometimes," she shared with the audience, "our greatest failures can lead to our most important successes, if we're willing to learn and change." Later that afternoon, she led a workshop for other HR professionals, sharing their story and the practical steps they'd taken. "The key," she explained, "is understanding that inclusion isn't a destination, it's a continuous journey of learning and adaptation." The company's client relationships had also transformed. Their sales team now routinely discussed accessibility features as standard offerings, not special accommodations. This approach had actually opened new market opportunities and strengthened their competitive position. During a break, the CEO pulled her aside. "Remember when you thought your career was over?" he asked with a smile. "Now you're teaching other companies how to transform their cultures." That's what real change looks like. The day ended with a virtual global employee forum. Teams from across the world shared their local initiatives and challenges. An office in Asia had adapted the inclusion training for their cultural context. European teams had integrated accessibility requirements into their product development cycle. Each region brought unique perspectives to their shared mission. As the HR manager prepared to leave for the day, she noticed a group of new interns touring the office. One young person using a mobility aid was explaining to the others how the office design allowed everyone to work together seamlessly. There was no awkwardness, no special attention, just natural inclusion in action. The CEO's words from their first meeting still guided their work: real change happens in small moments. Those moments had added up to create something remarkable, a workplace where everyone could truly belong and contribute their best. The journalist had one final question: what's next for Richardson Global? The HR manager smiled, glancing at the CEO. We're just getting started, she replied. True inclusion is an ongoing journey, and we're committed to leading the way, one step at a time. 1 year had passed since that transformative morning at Richardson Global. The company was hosting its first Inclusive Innovation Summit, and the main auditorium was packed with representatives from over 100 companies worldwide. The stage had been thoughtfully designed to be accessible to all presenters, with adjustable podiums and seamless ramp integration that looked like a natural part of the architecture. The HR manager, now a recognized authority on workplace transformation, stood backstage with the CEO, both preparing to share their story once again, though this time, with a year's worth of concrete results to back it up. The nervous energy in her stomach wasn't from fear anymore, but from excitement about what they were about to announce. When I think back to that morning, she whispered to the CEO, I can hardly recognize myself. How did you know I could change? He smiled, adjusting his tie. I didn't. I just knew that true change needs both crisis and opportunity. You provided the crisis, I provided the opportunity. What happened next was all you. The summit opened with a video montage of their year-long journey. The footage showed the gradual transformation of their workplaces, but more importantly, it captured the human moments, spontaneous collaborations, breakthrough innovations, and countless small interactions that demonstrated genuine inclusion in action. A tech giant's representative approached the podium, announcing a groundbreaking partnership. They would be integrating Richardson Global's accessibility innovations into their operating systems, potentially impacting millions of users worldwide. The HR manager watched the CEO's face light up. This was what he had envisioned all along. During the lunch break, small groups formed organically throughout the venue. A young developer who used a wheelchair was demonstrating a new app he'd created at Richardson Global, software that could automatically generate accessibility suggestions for architectural plans. The HR manager overheard him explaining how his own experiences had inspired the innovation. The afternoon sessions focused on practical implementation. The HR manager led a workshop on transforming corporate culture, but this time, she included something new. We've all heard about ROI, return on investment, she explained. But we've discovered something we call ROI squared, return on inclusion and innovation. When you create truly inclusive environments, innovation naturally follows. She shared their latest statistics: employee retention had increased by 60%, innovation patents had tripled, and their market share had grown significantly. But the most powerful metrics were the human ones. Stories of employees who had finally felt free to be themselves at work, of teams that had discovered new ways of collaborating, of customers who felt truly valued. The CEO took the stage in the afternoon, revealing their most ambitious initiative yet. Richardson Global and his tech company were establishing an inclusive innovation lab, a space where people with diverse abilities could collaborate on developing new technologies. The lab would be open to other companies and organizations, creating a hub for inclusive innovation. Imagine, he said, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium, a world where workplace inclusion isn't just a policy, but a driver of innovation. Where different abilities aren't seen as limitations, but as unique perspectives that can solve problems in new ways. A demonstration area had been set up in the conference hall, showcasing prototypes of their latest innovations. One device allowed people with limited mobility to control complex machinery using eye movements. Another provided real-time translation and captioning in multiple languages simultaneously. Each innovation had emerged from the collaborative environment they'd created. The HR manager noticed a familiar face in the crowd, the security guard who had barely acknowledged the CEO that first morning. He was now part of their accessibility team, having revealed his own hidden disability and become an advocate for change. He was giving a presentation on security protocols that accommodated everyone without compromising safety. During the afternoon break, a group of employees shared their stories. One spoke about how the company's new flexible work policies had allowed her to manage her chronic illness while advancing her career. Another described how the inclusive design principles they'd learned had helped him create better products for all users, not just those with disabilities. The CEO's tech company presented their latest collaboration, a virtual reality training program that simulated different abilities, helping employees understand and empathize with diverse perspectives. The program had already been adopted by several major corporations for their sensitivity training. As the summit drew to a close, the HR manager took the stage one final time. "A year ago, I was the problem," she admitted to the crowd. "I represented everything that needed to change in corporate culture. Today, I stand before you not as someone who has all the answers, but as proof that transformation is possible when we're willing to confront our biases and learn from our mistakes." The CEO joined her on stage for the closing remarks. Together, they unveiled their next phase, a global mentorship program that would pair companies beginning their inclusion journey with those who had successfully transformed their cultures. Richardson Global would share their failures as openly as their successes, believing that honest vulnerability was the key to genuine change. As the attendees filed out, many stopped to share their own stories or ask for advice. The HR manager noticed how the conversations naturally adapted to different communication needs, some spoken, some signed, some typed on devices. This effortless accommodation of diversity was perhaps their greatest achievement. The CEO's final words to the summit resonated through the hall: "We're not just changing workplaces, we're changing lives. And in doing so, we're discovering that inclusion isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. It's not just about accommodating differences, it's about leveraging them to create something better for everyone." 18 months after that fateful morning, the HR manager stood in the exact spot where she had once made those discriminatory comments. The office space was unrecognizable now, not just in its physical layout, but in its energy and spirit. She was waiting to welcome a special visitor, someone whose arrival brought their story full circle. A young professional wheeled through the entrance, her resume impressive but her nervousness visible. She was interviewing for the position of Deputy Chief of Inclusion and Innovation, a role that hadn't existed before the transformation. The HR manager smiled, remembering her own journey from bias to advocacy. "Welcome to Richardson Global," she said warmly, noticing how the candidate relaxed at her genuine tone. "Before we start the interview, I'd like to share a story with you." She gestured toward the wall where a timeline of their transformation journey was displayed, complete with before and after photos of the workspace. The CEO had joined them for this interview, arriving early as was his habit now. He watched with pride as the HR manager shared their story, noting how she no longer flinched at the painful beginning but used it as a powerful teaching moment. 18 months ago, I stood right here and made assumptions about someone's abilities based on their wheelchair, she explained to the candidate. That person turned out to be not just our CEO's partner but a catalyst for the most significant transformation in our company's history. The candidate's eyes widened with recognition. I read about your story in business school. Your company's case study is now part of the core curriculum in corporate ethics and inclusion. The tour of the office revealed how much had truly changed. The innovation lab was buzzing with activity, where teams of developers, some using various assistive technologies, collaborated on new projects. One team was finalizing a revolutionary voice-controlled system that could operate complex machinery, while another was testing a new type of adaptive office furniture. They passed the customer service department, where representatives communicated with clients through multiple channels, voice, text, sign language via video, and even a new augmented reality system that helped bridge communication gaps. The department's satisfaction ratings had hit record highs. The most remarkable change, the HR manager explained, isn't in our technology or our policies. It's in our mindset. We no longer think in terms of accommodations, we think in terms of possibilities. The CEO nodded in agreement. Every barrier we've removed has unlocked new potential, not just for people with disabilities, but for everyone. Our most innovative solutions have come from embracing different perspectives and abilities. They reached the conference room where the interview would take place. The candidate noticed how the space automatically adjusted to accommodate her wheelchair, no special arrangements needed. It was just one of countless small details that showed how deeply inclusion had been woven into the company's fabric. During the interview, the conversation turned to the future. The candidate shared her vision for taking their inclusion initiatives even further, suggesting ideas that neither the HR manager or the CEO had considered. It was exactly what they had hoped for, someone who could see beyond what they'd already achieved. You know, the CEO said, the day I came here 18 months ago, I had a choice. I could have exposed the discrimination I faced and demanded resignations. Instead, I saw an opportunity for real change. Looking at where we are now, I know it was the right decision. The HR manager added, we learned that true inclusion isn't about avoiding mistakes, it's about how we respond to them and grow from them. Every person who walks through our doors now has the opportunity to contribute their unique perspective and abilities. Later that afternoon, they hosted a virtual global town hall. Offices from around the world joined, each sharing their local innovations in workplace inclusion. A team in Asia had developed a new way to make traditional ceremonies accessible to everyone. European colleagues had created a mentorship program specifically for neurodivergent employees. South American offices had pioneered new ways to integrate indigenous accessibility practices into modern workplace design. The CEO took a moment to reflect on their journey. When I first entered this building, I experienced discrimination firsthand. Today, we're not just talking about inclusion, we're living it. But our work isn't done. Each day brings new challenges and opportunities to learn and grow. The HR manager's phone buzzed with a notification. Their story had just been featured in another international publication. But what caught her eye wasn't the article itself, but the comments section. People from around the world were sharing how Richardson Global's transformation had inspired changes in their own workplaces. As the day drew to a close, she sat in her office, looking at a photo from that first confrontational meeting. Sometimes, she mused to the CEO, the worst moments in our lives can lead to the best changes, if we're brave enough to learn from them. The candidate they'd interviewed that morning had been offered the position, and her acceptance email reflected the excitement of joining a company that had transformed itself so completely. But more importantly, it reflected the understanding that their journey wasn't over, it was simply entering a new phase. The CEO's final words that day summed up their journey perfectly. 18 months ago, this company faced a choice between preserving the status quo and embracing radical change. We chose change, and in doing so, we discovered that inclusion isn't just about making space for differences, it's about recognizing that our differences make us stronger. That's not just corporate policy, that's human truth. As the office lights dimmed, the HR manager took one last look around. The space that had once been a symbol of discrimination had become a beacon of hope and change. But more than that, it had become proof that even the darkest moments could lead to the brightest transformations, if you were willing to learn, grow, and change.